it leads to another question, another similar kind of problem. We tend to believe in sense perception, and that itself is a fallacy. And that is exactly where things open up. We have people count on sense perception and assume that derivatives from sense perception as an argument provide the way in which the universe is organized. And now we look at sense perception critically. We look at our own human sense perception, which is what we should understand most clearly. And we find out that that is very inaccurate. And thus we are saying, where does this great inaccuracy come from? It comes from relying on sense perception. The sense perception is not correct, that it's a fallacy, and we have to find the secret of what the universe sees without human sense perception. And that means what you then can say, we have to completely to do that, we must completely redefine what we consider sense perception, not on the basis of sense perception. And once you do that, you go into a completely different domain. And you take this idea of the vicarious hypothesis concept, which already exists implicitly in Nicholas Acusa, where all this concept came, that you cannot have closure based on sense perception, which is Acusa's challenge, and which is what the chief challenge looked at by Kepler. Because Kepler was actually the primary realization of what Nicholas Acusa had done. And he considered himself to be exactly that. Mm-hmm. When you do that, you say, okay, let's leave out human sense perception as such. We don't say sense perception in the form of sense certainty exists. That does not exist. That's a fantasy which we poor animals, in our animal capabilities, have sense perceptions. Do these sense perceptions show us the real universe? Or do they show us a shadow which is cast by the kind of prism that you use as sense perception? And therefore, this is the essence I think, of science today. The tendency to exploit the idea that sense perception is sense certainty is what the fallacy is. I mean, what we have is what's sense perception. Where does it come from biologically? It comes from certain senses which we use, which are actually very crude and don't show us the truth. But we find them useful up to a certain point. But when we try to explain the relationship among planetary bodies, it doesn't work anymore. And when you look at the question of biology in particular, you take the question, you add in the question of life. The question is, does sense perception define the principle of life? Can you generate that principle from mere life, as sense perception as the notion of life? If you think about the efficiency of the human mind, which is what we're supposed to be using, we find that the animals have no conception of mind. They may have something which functions as a surrogate for mind, just as our sense perceptions enable us to find a surrogate for the role of mind. But the way we understand the universe, the very existence of true science, depends upon leaping beyond sense perception and looking at the relationship of man's mind, that is the creative powers of man's mind, to make discoveries and to act upon those discoveries, which you cannot access in any other way. And therefore, it's the principle of, you have to imagine what happens if you take away sense perception and try to imagine a mind not using sense perception, trying to educe the significance of these factors which are causing the changes within the universe. And so when you cancel the sense certainty from the equation and assume that sense perceptions are simply phenomena which are caused by the accident called human sense perception. And it's the idea that human sense perception is the basis of the universe is what the error is. The only species that you can look at that we know of to counter the sense perception argument is the human mind. only the human mind has been, and that's the characteristic of the human mind, to be able to do that. And that's what all real science is. And that's the issue. The issue of that creativity is the essential thing, that the human species progress in making fundamental ontological changes in the way we think, in the way we act. We become a higher order of species than we were the year before, if we are really progressing. We're making discoveries which change the way mankind deals with the universe. We get away from sense perception. We say we can't trust sense perception as the standard for existence. We have to realize that there's a process of evolution going on within the solar system and beyond it, which is affecting us. And we're going to have to make changes in our behavior, which will change our character in a certain directed way. And so therefore the idea of sense certainty, the very idea of sense certainty, is the mentality of a slave, a voluntary slave who wants to remain a slave, who's comfortable by remaining a slave. Or we stick to our traditional customs, which means we destroy ourselves as slaves of an oligarchy. And what's the problem is get beyond this idea of sense certainty and try to look at the idea of creativity per se, which is what man's distinction is. And say our challenge is to grasp that concept of progress, not as just progress in some touchy-feely way, but a sense that we can change mankind's relation. And what are we going to do as mankind when the sun blows up? And it's going to happen. It's forecast. It's one of the forecastable things, the most precious forecastable things they have loose in the archive. Huh? And so mankind has got to think about the time the sun blows up. Not that we're going to experience it, but the fact is that the process leading in that direction is forecastable by those standards, and we have to expect it. Therefore, is mankind's existence terminated by the anticipation of this process of the next 2 billion years? We don't know what point in the next billion years mankind could no longer exist in the solar system. And therefore, the question is, mankind has a destiny to reach beyond the confines of the solar system as we define it today. And why not? Mankind, as a creative being, is capable of advancing step by step based on its own successes and creativity. Mankind has shown that in the entire course of the history of mankind. All progress has shown that. But the oligarchical system clouds our understanding of that.
Absolutely, and I think you see it also in the culture, in the fact that in order to stop progress, before you had the political machinations which unleashed World War I, for a couple of decades before that in Europe, you had the oligarchical system attacking the culture. And the attack came in the form of attacking the idea that the legacy of the past in music, from Bach through Mozart and Beethoven, that this was all the old culture, and that we need something new. Now, what did they introduce in drama, in music? They introduced a form of culture which is a celebration of the most bestial aspects of man, which aren't really man, of this kind of sensual, bloody murder, etc. And you see it in the form that music took, getting away from the idea that the mind drives music and that the listener of music is experiencing this kind of change and uplifting of the mind. And you have the change of that where music becomes a literal representation of sense objects. And you see that in the music of Liszt, of Richard Strauss, who wrote these tone poems, which are a literal description of a kind of sense perceptual experience. And this, instead of the sound representing an idea, the sound is imitating animal sounds or something like this. But this is the culture that actually set up the population to accept the destruction in World War I, which has led into today. So I think it's important. First, you have to get the population to accept the idea that they are only limited to their senses, and that's when they're open for anything.
Yeah, it reminds us of the role of Brahms, that you look around and when Brahms died, more than Brahms died, it was the end of the whole classical culture.
was now becoming a shambles from that point on. People didn't, and I think there's almost no understanding of what this significance was in terms of even music schools and so forth today. I don't think they really understand it.
No.
They've lost it. And they don't know that they've been stupefied. That's the one thing about being stupefied. The good part is you feel nice because you don't know you're being stupefied. And that's my issue, is this higher conception of the principle of creativity in mankind, that's the issue. And we cannot allow the literal, crude sense perception to get in the way of our seeing what creativity is. Because the future of mankind depends upon creativity, and it depends upon people coming to understand creativity as creativity, instead of so-called fixed models.
It's not just the future of mankind. The universe is obviously requiring something of us as a species.
And if we don't succeed, we will become extinct as our own fault, our voluntary decision to become extinct. And that's where government, as today, like the thing I shocked a lot of our people yesterday by presenting this picture of what the problem is here. They're all thinking in terms of democratic solutions. They don't realize that these ideas of democratic solutions are solutions of the enemies of our foundation of our republic. And therefore they become stupefied because they believe in common sense. And common sense is dead sense. Most cases, they've stopped thinking. They're just trying to repeat the past with a new combination of pieces on the chessboard, introducing a new piece on the chessboard, trying to figure it in. That would be their creative idea.
All right. Trying to make a new shared opinion.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where I put the emphasis on is this. Because if we don't understand the role of what creativity is, what the role of creativity is in terms of mankind's role and in terms of the evolutionary process which we experience in our knowledge of the solar system, for example, we don't have anything. So we have to block this idea of sense certainty. And you have to say sense uncertainty, which means creativity.
Well, we certainly are in need of much more of that. All right.
Well, that's my little passion, shall we say. That's where we must go if mankind is going to escape the deadly threats that we face now.
All right. Well, good. Well, that was a fun discussion. So that'll do it for this week, and we'll see you next week.